humor me for a second, and I don't normally do crowd participation gigs, but please, everybody raise your hand. I don't care if it's your right or left, and I'm going to ask you a question. I'm answering it for you in advance. So everybody just, let me see some hands out there. Great. And it'll add up by the end of my my talk tonight. Okay, the question is, how many people out here have made an extremely tough decision? Obviously, everybody here has made one of these, whether you're young or old. Now keep your hand up if you've made a very tough decision in a time-critical situation. All right, so I still see a lot of hands up. That's awesome. A lot of hard workers out there, but I do see some hands going down. Now, how many people out here in the audience have made a very difficult decision in a time-critical situation in a life-changing or life or death situation? All right. So I want you to hold on to that. A lot of hands went down. There are still a few up, and you can now lower your hands. And thank you for whatever that situation was. I'm sure it was stressful. I'm here tonight to share my experience on the morning of September 11th, 2001, 24 years ago today, as we remember the victims of that morning and the heroes of that morning, of which there were many American heroes that morning. For me, the morning started a little non-standard. We at the 144th Fighter Wing had just returned home from 2 consecutive summers of flying over Iraq in Operation Southern Watch. And we got home literally the last day of August, so we thought, hey, 2 years back-to-back summers, it's going to be kind of easy going for us, and we're going to just get back into our normal routine. For me, I was in a 2-ship flight lead upgrade, so I was going to be the first person at work that morning, and I left my house at about 5:40 a.m., which is non-standard. Don't normally go in that early, but as I was driving in, I could just sense, as I'm passing cars, I could tell people were listening to the radio and having conversations, and I was rocking out to AC/DC, trying to get myself mentally prepared for my training sortie. And I saw at the next stoplight a woman crying, and they were both pointing to the radio. So I switched off my music and went to the radio, and it was on every channel how a airplane had hit one of the towers in New York. First thing that went through my mind was, man, the weather must be terrible. What a horrible tragedy. I remember, like, in the Second World War, an airplane hit the Empire State Building, but wow, this is horrible. And then as I continue down Herndon, as I'm about to get on 41, I hear on the radio that a second airplane hit the North Tower. And I knew immediately, like, our country's under attack. So I haul down 41, probably break a few speed records there, sorry there, Sheriff, and getting myself to work. About 5 minutes out from the base, I get a phone call. It's a command post on the base saying, hey, we're having a recall. The country's under attack. So the 144th Fighter Wing got moving very quickly, and they started recalling all of the personnel, all 1,000, 1,200 people that worked out at the base. I was the first pilot that showed up that morning. And for those of you that don't know, the 144th Fighter Wing, our mission is defense of the homeland. So, like, this is our mission that we have here in Fresno. We defend the West Coast of America, but we're trained specifically for scenarios like this. It's one of the many different doc statements that we have out of the base, but our bread and butter that we consider here in Fresno. And so I immediately roll into the base, and they hand me what we call an alert kit, and it's a kit that has all the potential targets that would be in California. Our nuclear power plants, our bridges, our national landmarks, our places of mass population gatherings. And in there also we have authenticators and other things that allow us to perform this mission, which is air defense of the West Coast. And they told me, go grab your gear, and you're in jet 234 at the very front of the flight line. But 234, it's not loaded. None of our airplanes were loaded with weapons at that time. And the boss rolls in tells me, hey, just grab your gear and head on out there. So unlike most of the rest of the entire country, I was not in front of a television or radio or talking with other individuals about the events that were playing out that morning. I grabbed my gear, I got set up in my F-16, and then I started seeing people roll into the base. And then in less than 30, 40 minutes, you had 1,000 people, none of them showered, on the base, doing their job, and literally loading live weapons and ammunition into our jets. And as pilots rolled in, they each lined up on the flight line. And then, not many people know this, but Fresno, the 144th Fighter Wing, had the very first fighter wing in the entire country that were able to report full mission capable as a base that morning for the country.
Wow.
So we had a really good response from all of our fellow citizen soldiers here in Fresno, citizen airmen. And so for me, the way the morning played out was watching the crew chiefs come up, and as they're loading a missile onto the airplane, like, Tigger, you're not going to believe this, man, but the Pentagon was just hit, and you could see this the seriousness in everybody's eyes. It was a very, very surreal moment. We heard about Flight 93 going down, and for us, nobody knew what had happened. We didn't know if another air defense unit was scrambled to shoot it down, because that was our mission, although it was completely out of the mind of anybody on the base as we woke up that morning. And as all this information were coming in, and we hear that the first tower collapsed, the second tower hadn't collapsed yet. The wing commander comes over to my jet, crawls up the ladder, and looks me in the eye and says, hey, look, I don't want you to think about anything out there that you're hearing about. Don't think about the situation. I just want you to focus on your training. You will not have to make any of these decisions. It goes back to the opening of my talk. You're not going to have to make a tough decision. You may have to do something very tough, but what you're going to do is you're going to rely on your training. You'll be talking with NORAD and the people that control us when we go do our mission. But nothing I was going to do that morning was going to be up to me. And literally, as he's crawling down my ladder and I'm walking across the flight line to talk to my flight lead, the scramble horn goes off. And so, if you've heard a scramble horn before, it immediately gets all the adrenaline in your body going. I immediately started my aircraft. I saw my flight lead give the signal, we're going. We started our jets, lowered our canopies, taxied out, and then got the radio call from our command post. There is a target of interest 150 miles off the coast of California, heading for San Francisco, after we've directed him to divert to Canada or Mexico. So here's the situation. A Thailand Air 747 was unfortunate enough to be the first airplane coming across the Pacific arriving in California that morning, and their flight crew did not properly plan their fuel. Other airplanes were, as they were checking in, were diverted to Mexico or Canada, and they had to divert fuel to get to those locations. This aircraft informed FAA that they did not have the fuel to divert. So the national command structure decides to scramble Fresno, and two F-16s, my flight lead and I, blast out of here. We flew right over this park, going well over 1,000 miles an hour. Probably not over this park, but as we were cruising out. I went back after the mission and watched the tapes, and we crossed over San Francisco 9 minutes after the scramble horn went off. So from start to San Francisco took us 9 minutes. So you can imagine how fast we were going. We're going over 1,000 miles an hour, Mach 1.2, almost Mach 1.3. We broke a lot of windows heading out to the Pacific that morning. And this was my first mission ever. We just returned home from flying over Iraq, being shot at, doing combat missions, which were kind of stressful at the time, but nothing compares to having your country under attack and then being called upon to respond to a potential attack, which we thought was the 747 coming in from Thailand. I'll never forget, the day was very much like today. I've heard a lot of people say just how gorgeous it is today. This was what 9/11 was 24 years ago today. Crystal clear skies, a couple white puffy clouds, which pilots all love. But it did not match with what the mission assignment was. Go out and potentially interdict and hopefully not have to destroy a civilian 747 coming to harm our country. We check in with NORAD, the Western Air Defense Sector, and they tell us this aircraft is non-cooperational. Our game plan, as we're developing the game plan airborne, they give us the authentication. We know we're speaking to the right command authority. They tell us the game plan is if this aircraft does not comply, the nation is under attack, and if he does not comply by the time they get over land, our game plan is we're going to have to bring down this airplane. So as Lieutenant Colonel Ron Manner, Spanky and I get radar contact on this 747, you could see it 40, 50 miles away. It was such a clear, beautiful day. We are developing our own game plan. Ron, Spanky's going to set up behind the aircraft and get his weapon system on the engines. And my task was going to be, when directed by NORAD, to go up and visually identify the cockpit of the aircraft and see what is going on inside the airplane. Because we know that at least 4 airplanes have already been hijacked, and we did not know if this was the beginning of a West Coast attack. So as Spanky tells me he's got his weapon systems up and functional and I'm clear to proceed, we start losing radio communication with NORAD. They've already given us the mission: VID the cockpit, make sure that there's nothing wrong going on, and give us a verbal response to what's going on. So normally, during a normal intercept, you would just kind of cruise up alongside the airplane, a comfortable 500 feet away, wingtip to the wingtip. On this morning, I was directed to fly as close as possible to make sure that I was able to see inside the cockpit, which meant that I had to fly over the top of the 747's wing. And as I was doing it, I noticed, and this was the first time when I started to think, hey, things might be okay, because every window along that 747 had a face looking out at me, like some kids waving, and I'm like, okay, my blood pressure's starting to settle a little bit. It doesn't look like a super stressful time. I didn't see signs for help or anything in the windows, which was great. And then as I was approaching the cockpit, I mean, literally from here to the front row of people here, away from the cockpit, well within the bounds of what our rules are. But I needed to see for myself, and I look in there, and there's 3 pilots in there, and their eyes were as big as saucers. Like, what is going on? And of course, they were in communication with the FAA on this entire intercept, and they heard our radio calls to them telling them that they had to turn south and turn away from San Francisco and lower their landing gear. And this was what we call compliance. They're telling us we do not have the fuel to do that. So I'm reporting back to NORAD. Nobody from NORAD is answering. Unfortunately, and why this mission was classified for almost 5 years, was the fact that we didn't know that we had a radio coverage gap from about 80 miles to 15 miles off the coast. And it was classified because we didn't want to advertise this. And I couldn't tell this story about how we weren't communicating with NORAD, but we were given a directive, like if they hit land and they haven't complied, this is the game plan to shoot them down. And thank God, like 15 miles before we hit landfall, we were able to get report into NORAD and tell them they're refusing to divert, but the cockpit looks normal, the people on board, everything looks normal. And then the decision was made for us. Hey, we're gonna now headbutt this airplane, which means just get in front of them and force them to turn south away from the city. Because with this airplane wasn't heading towards San Francisco airport, it was heading towards the city, which is where the NAVAID was. And so we forced him to move south, and then to everybody's relief, he lowered his landing gear and said, look, we're really low on, we're on fumes, but we think we can make it in visually to the airport. And we landed there, the 747 landed opposite direction, totally non-standard. There's 100 law enforcement vehicles and people all over the runway. Spake and I flew over the top of the 747, making sure that it would stop. And as it pulled off the runway, we took a deep sigh of relief, asked NORAD what our mission was, and their mission was to return to base, RTB. And Spake and I flew back to Fresno. And that mission seemed like an absolute lifetime. The stress was about as high as you can imagine for a first responder or a defender. And thank God I had a very happy ending for that airplane that morning. When we landed, I was shocked to see that entire mission took just 45 minutes from takeoff to landing.
Wow.
So that's what happens when you're heading like almost twice the speed of sound out over the ocean. And then we flew back at a much more measured pace. But I want to say that even if, like, God forbid, we got that order, these people were not compliant, and we had to shoot down an airplane that we thought was being part of the attack, or it was part of the attack, and we had to down this airplane. I want to share with everybody that I wouldn't have been able to raise my hand and say that was a very tough decision, because this decision would have been made by the President of the United States, the Secretary of Defense, the commander of NORAD, and we are just executing the mission. It would have been life-changing for sure, as it was for many people that morning on 9/11, but it wouldn't have been our decision. I want to contrast that with the decision of the people on Flight 93, Todd Beamer specifically. Nobody on that plane planned for that morning. You can't plan for any of this. Most people were planning on a vacation when they got on that airplane, planning on a business trip, planning on going home and visiting their family. They weren't planning to be hijacked and lose their lives 24 years ago today. I will submit, though, that I strongly believe that they were mentally prepared that morning. And so why do I say that? I say that because these people decided to defend their country that morning. I'm sure they were hoping that it would have turned out differently, obviously. But they knew when they rushed that cockpit and tried to foil the plans of the terrorists that they may be ending their lives by doing so. But they were mentally prepared to do that. If they weren't mentally prepared, they may have just sat there and hoped for the best. But they took action, which tells you that they made a decision. They were not going to let the terrorists accomplish their mission. And by doing so, they defended this nation. So I want anybody in here to raise your hand if you made a tough decision, it was time critical, it's a life or death situation in the defense of your nation. I see very few. And that's why we call them heroes.
Yes.
Thank you very much. And Richard,